Hey, it's Becky for Patchwork Posse, and today we are going to talk about leaders and enders. Little bits of fabric that you put in your machine prior to sewing points, half square triangles, flying geese, anything that might get jammed up in your needle. And it saves a tiny bit of thread, but it really allows you to chain piece really quickly. I also share a little tip on using more than just scrap pieces, which will help you make progress on other quilts that you are sewing. Let's talk about having extra little bits that go in our machine before and after we sew things. So if you've ever had a problem with your machine eating points, or maybe it cuts the thread a little too short, but you're just having issues with it, this is where leaders and enders come in play. So what I'm going to show you is how I use my leaders and enders when I am sewing. So I don't have one currently in here. Usually I do, and it stays in my machine whether it's turned on or not. I am just going to do some chain piecing here on this project. So here I am at the end of sewing my 4 pieces together. Now what I can do is usually, you clip your thread, so you would pull this out, snip your thread, or use the cutting mechanism on your machine. But what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stitch another piece to the machine. So this is just selvage edges. They're cut-offs. They were in my scrap bin. I sew this on. Now what I can do is go back and snip off the pieces that I were chain piecing. So whether it's chain piecing or regular stitching, it really doesn't matter. But this piece being in here allows you to move forward in your project without having to snip your thread. So it does save you quite a bit of thread. I've got this piece here and it is 2.5 inches long. So it's not much thread that you're using. But what this does is allows me to remove this piece and move on to my next step. So I've got my next step ready to go on the side of my machine, so I can go ahead and do that. After I stitch my first one, I can go ahead and remove my leader or my ender. So these are just sitting by my machine all the time. So I'm able to just grab them and use them when I need. Now this really works well for half square triangles as well as flying geese. Anything really with a point that goes into the machine. Because the stitch is already started and already going, the thread is not going to pull out. It will move on really easily. Some machines snip the thread really closely to where it goes into the needle. And so I find that some machines, they unthread the machine every time you start a new stitch. And that can be super, super frustrating. So using leaders and enders allows you to avoid all of those issues. So now I'm at to the end. I'm going to grab my piece of fabric. I'm going to stick it under the needle and I am just going to continue. And I'm going to snip this off and I can move to the next step. Now I know that there are some who have on the side of their machine blocks like 4 patches or just simple squares that they can sew into 4 patches. And so the pieces that they use for the leader and enders are actually squares or mile a minute technique sitting there. So you're just grabbing random bits of fabric and sewing them together. So no matter if it's just scraps that you're using or, slowly piecing blocks together, either works. I wanted to show you some of my leaders and enders that I have made in the past. So they've just been random half square triangles. These, I mean, you can sew them together and make something out of them. I think I layered multiple of them on top of each other and made like a, what do you call it? A drink mat, a drink coaster, because it really is super stiff, and depending on the thread that you used, if it's white or maybe if it was a colored thread, these can really become quite colorful and a lot of fun. You can use little pieces. You know, I've got larger pieces, little pieces. I've got leftover half square triangles. So any of them work. But this is a great way to avoid your thread coming unthreaded from your machine, or pieces of fabric getting stuck in your needle and all jammed up. So that's a look at how to use leaders and enders.